If you think one little misunderstanding can't turn your whole life upside down, then you've never accidentally confessed to the most popular guy in school. That was the sentence I kept replaying in my head every time someone asked how Noah Hayes and I supposedly became a thing. The funny part was that none of it was true. 3 days earlier, my biggest concern had been passing chemistry without setting off another smoke-filled disaster during lab. I was Ethan Carter, the kind of student teachers described as dependable and classmates forgot was standing beside them. I liked it that way. Being invisible meant fewer awkward conversations, fewer rumors, and absolutely no reason for someone like Noah Hayes to ever notice me. Noah was different. He was the golden boy of Westbrook High, captain of the varsity soccer team, honor roll student, volunteer at every fundraiser, and somehow still nice enough that nobody could honestly hate him. Teachers trusted him, parents admired him, and freshmen looked at him like he belonged on a movie poster instead of walking the same hallways as everyone else. We had spoken exactly twice in 2 years. Once because he held the library door open for me, and once because I accidentally borrowed his calculator during a math exam. That was the full extent of our relationship. Then Lara Bennett caught me outside English class with a look so desperate I thought she was about to tell me someone had failed a final exam. Instead, she pulled a pale blue envelope from her notebook and whispered, "Ethan, please. I need a favor." Before I could answer, she explained everything in one nervous breath. She had written Noah a letter. She wanted to tell him how she felt, but every time she saw him, she completely froze. She begged me to slide the envelope into his locker before lunch. "That's it," she promised. "No talking. No drama. Just leave it there." It sounded harmless enough. I even laughed and told her she was worrying too much. Carrying one envelope across the school couldn't possibly become the biggest mistake of my life. At 11:42, with the hallway nearly empty because everyone else had already rushed toward the cafeteria, I finally reached Noah's locker. I glanced left. I glanced right. Nobody was around. Perfect. I slipped the envelope halfway through the opening, just as another locker door slammed somewhere behind me. The sound made me jump. I turned instinctively, and before I realized what was happening, someone reached past my shoulder, pulled the letter free, and looked down at the neat handwriting on the front. My heart stopped. Noah Hayes smiled at the envelope, then looked directly into my eyes with an expression so warm it erased every word I had prepared to explain. "I never thought," he said softly, "you'd confess first." For a moment, I honestly wondered if I had misheard him. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Every explanation I had rehearsed vanished the second Noah looked at me with that calm, genuine smile. It was not the polite smile he gave teachers or the confident grin he wore after winning a game. This one was quieter, almost relieved, as though something he had secretly hoped for had finally happened. I lifted both hands in panic. "Wait, this is not what you think." Before I could finish, the lunch bell echoed through the hallway. Locker doors slammed open all around us as students poured back into the corridor. The timing could not have been worse. Noah folded the pale blue envelope carefully and slipped it into the pocket of his varsity jacket. "You do not have to explain right now," he said with a small nod. "I appreciate your honesty." My heart nearly stopped again. "No, seriously, I was only." The rest of my sentence disappeared beneath the growing noise of hundreds of students filling the hallway. Someone from the soccer team spotted Noah standing beside me and called out, "Hey Hayes, are you coming?" Noah glanced toward them before looking back at me. "Can we talk after school?" he asked. I froze. He took my silence as agreement and walked away with an expression that somehow looked happier than when he had arrived. I stood there staring after him until someone bumped into my shoulder and reminded me I was blocking the hallway. By the time I reached the cafeteria, disaster had already begun spreading faster than I could imagine. 2 girls sitting near the entrance looked at me, whispered something to each other, and immediately smiled. At another table, one of the junior varsity players raised his eyebrows at Noah before glancing toward me with a knowing grin. I had not even sat down before my best friend Mason dropped his lunch tray across from me. "What did you do?" he asked. "Nothing." "Then why did Noah Hayes smile at you like you just made his entire week?" I buried my face in my hands. "It is a misunderstanding." Mason laughed. "That is exactly what people say before telling the most interesting story ever." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. Our class group chat had exploded. Someone had posted a blurry photo of Noah standing in front of his locker while I faced him with a bright blue envelope between us. The caption read, "Finally happened." The comments multiplied every second. I closed the app immediately, but it was too late. People had already decided what they believed. Across the cafeteria, I noticed Lara slowly walking in with her lunch. The second our eyes met, she smiled hopefully, expecting good news. I shook my head once. Her smile disappeared. She hurried over, lowering her voice. "Did he read it?" I nodded. "He did." "Well." I looked around at the dozens of students pretending not to watch us. Then I whispered the sentence that made every bit of color drain from Lara's face. "He thinks I wrote it." Lara stared at me as though I had just announced the school had caught fire. She blinked twice before whispering, "You are joking." I wished I were. He looked me right in the eyes and thanked me for being honest. She covered her face with both hands. "This cannot be happening." Neither of us noticed Mason quietly sliding closer until he cleared his throat. "So let me get this straight," he said. "Lara wrote the letter. Ethan delivered it. Noah thinks Ethan wrote it. And now the entire school thinks the golden boy has finally found someone?" Neither of us answered. Mason leaned back in his chair and sighed dramatically. "This is either the worst luck in history or the beginning of a romantic comedy." Lara immediately shook her head. "I have to tell him the truth." I almost agreed, but before either of us could stand, another wave of students entered the cafeteria. Their conversation stopped for a split second when Noah walked in. Somehow, even in a crowded room, he had the effortless ability to draw every pair of eyes without trying. Instead of joining the soccer team at their usual table, he looked around until his eyes landed on me. Then, to my complete horror, he smiled and walked directly toward us. My pulse jumped so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Lara quietly slipped out of her seat. "Good luck," she whispered before disappearing into the crowd. "Traitor." Noah stopped beside our table with the same calm expression he always wore. "Mind if I sit here?" Mason answered before I could. "Go ahead." Then he stood, picked up his tray, and abandoned me without the slightest hint of guilt. I made a mental note to never help him with homework again. Noah sat across from me as though this had always been normal. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he placed a carton of chocolate milk on the table. "They ran out of regular milk," he said. "I remembered hearing you tell someone chocolate was your favorite." I stared at the carton. I had mentioned that once during sophomore year. There was no reason he should remember it. "Thank you," I managed to say. Around us, conversation slowly resumed, but I could feel people stealing glances every few seconds. Phones appeared above lunch trays. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "They are eating together." I wanted to disappear beneath the table. Noah, on the other hand, seemed completely unaware of the attention. He talked about classes, upcoming exams, and the soccer season with an ease that made it feel as though we had known each other for years. The strange part was that once I stopped panicking, I realized he was surprisingly easy to talk to. He actually listened instead of waiting for his turn to speak. He laughed at my dry jokes. He asked questions that showed he genuinely cared about the answers. By the time lunch ended, I had almost forgotten the misunderstanding that had started everything. Almost. As we stood to leave, Noah adjusted the strap of his backpack and smiled again. "I will wait for you after school." Before I could explain anything, he added quietly, "Do not worry about everyone else. We can take things one step at a time." He walked away before I found the courage to stop him, leaving me frozen in the middle of the cafeteria while dozens of curious eyes followed both of us. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether correcting this misunderstanding was going to be much harder than delivering one simple letter. Lara spent the rest of the afternoon avoiding both Noah and me with remarkable determination. Every time I caught sight of her in the hallway, she either disappeared into another classroom or suddenly became fascinated by a bulletin board she had probably walked past 1,000 times before. I could not even blame her. If I had accidentally started the biggest rumor at Westbrook High, I might have hidden too. Unfortunately, I did not have that luxury. Noah was waiting exactly where he said he would be when the final bell rang. He leaned casually against the brick wall outside the main entrance with the late afternoon sun behind him, greeting classmates with polite smiles while somehow keeping his attention fixed on the front doors. The second I stepped outside, he noticed me. "Hey," he called warmly, walking over before I had any chance of escaping toward the parking lot. "Ready?" I blinked. "Ready for what?" I thought we could stop by Maple Street Cafe. They make the best hot chocolate in town. I stared at him in complete confusion. You remembered I like chocolate milk, I said before I could stop myself. He smiled. I remember a lot of little things. That answer only made my thoughts more tangled. Before I could explain the misunderstanding again, a group of students walked past us. One girl nudged her friend with a grin, while another discreetly lifted her phone, pretending to check a message even though the camera was clearly pointed in our direction. Noah did not seem bothered in the slightest. If anything, he looked unusually relaxed. We walked the 3 blocks to the cafe together, and the entire way I searched for the perfect moment to tell him everything. Every single time I gathered enough courage to begin, something interrupted us. A neighbor stopped Noah to congratulate the soccer team on last week's victory. An elderly customer recognized him from a volunteer fundraiser and thanked him for helping repaint the community center. By the time we finally sat down with 2 steaming mugs near the front window, I felt as though the opportunity had slipped away again. Can I ask you something? Noah said after a quiet moment. I nodded cautiously. Why me? My heart skipped. What do you mean? You could have liked anyone. He laughed softly, almost embarrassed. I guess I never imagined someone like you would choose someone like me. That sentence caught me completely off guard. From my perspective, Noah Hayes was the one everyone admired. Yet the way he said those words sounded sincere, almost uncertain. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated under the table. It was a message from Lara. Do not tell him yet. Please. I need a little more time. I closed my eyes for a second. One more delay. One more excuse. One more chance for everything to become even more complicated. When I looked back up, Noah was watching me patiently, never pressuring me for an answer. I forced a small smile that I did not entirely feel. It is complicated, I admitted. He nodded as though that explanation was enough. Then I can wait. Those 4 simple words settled quietly between us, and somehow they carried more weight than any grand declaration ever could. Walking home that evening, I realized the misunderstanding was no longer surviving because nobody had corrected it. It was growing because every passing hour gave both of us another reason to keep talking, another reason to spend time together, and another reason for the entire school to believe the story they had already decided was true. By Thursday morning, the rumors had evolved into something I could no longer outrun. Nobody asked whether Noah Hayes and I were spending time together anymore. They simply assumed we were. Someone had quietly changed the seating chart in our class group chat by placing our names side by side with a tiny heart beside them. Mason showed it to me before first period and nearly laughed himself out of his chair. Congratulations, he said. Apparently the internet has decided your relationship is official before either of you had the chance. I groaned and dropped my forehead onto my desk. This is becoming a nightmare. Really? Mason replied. Because from where I am sitting, the most admired guy in school keeps choosing to spend time with you, and he actually seems happier than he has in months. I wanted to argue, but the classroom door opened before I found the words. Noah walked in carrying 2 coffees from the student cafe. Without hesitation, he placed one on my desk. You looked tired yesterday, he said. I figured the extra caffeine might help. The room fell completely silent for 2 full seconds before whispers spread in every direction. I could practically hear another rumor being born. During history class, our teacher announced a semester project that would count for almost 20% of our final grade. Before anyone could volunteer, she smiled at the class list in her hands. I have already assigned partners to encourage everyone to work with someone new. My stomach tightened. Ethan Carter and Noah Hayes. The entire classroom reacted at once. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. Someone else muttered, "Of course." I looked at Noah, expecting him to feel awkward, but he simply smiled and nodded as if partnering with me was the most natural thing in the world. After school, we met in the library to organize our project. We found a quiet table tucked between tall bookshelves where almost nobody ever studied. For the first hour, we barely talked about anything except research notes and deadlines. It was peaceful, almost normal. Then Noah excused himself to answer a phone call. He stepped into the hallway, but the library was so quiet that I could still hear parts of the conversation. "Yes, Dad," he said. "I understand." A long pause followed. "No, I am not neglecting soccer." Another silence. "I know the scouts will be watching next month." His voice remained polite, but it had lost the relaxed warmth I had become used to hearing. I said I understand. When he returned a few minutes later, The smile was back, but it looked carefully placed rather than genuine. "Everything okay?" I asked without thinking. He hesitated for the first time since I had met him. "Just family stuff." Most people would have ended the conversation there, but something about the exhaustion behind his eyes made me quietly say, "You do not have to pretend everything is perfect around me." Noah looked genuinely surprised. He let out a slow breath and gave a small laugh that sounded more relieved than amused. "You are the first person who has said that in a very long time." In that moment, the image everyone carried of the confident golden boy began to crack. Beneath the trophies, perfect grades, and endless compliments was someone carrying expectations that never seemed to end. For the first time since this impossible misunderstanding began, I stopped seeing Noah as the most popular student at Westbrook High. I simply saw another person who was trying very hard not to disappoint everyone around him. And without realizing it, my determination to fix one mistaken letter became tangled with a growing desire to understand the real person hidden behind his perfect reputation. By the beginning of the following week, something strange had happened. Nobody ever asked Noah and me whether we were together anymore, because everyone had quietly accepted the idea as fact. Teachers paired us for discussions without thinking twice. Friends automatically saved 2 seats instead of 1. Even the librarian smiled knowingly whenever we claimed the same study table after school. The funny part was that neither of us had actually confirmed anything. We had simply stopped correcting people every single time they assumed the same story. It was easier that way, or at least that was the excuse I kept giving myself. Our history project slowly became the center of every afternoon. We met in the library, shared research articles, compared notes, and somehow finished more work than either of us ever managed alone. Noah was nothing like the effortless perfection everyone imagined. He highlighted every important sentence in different colors, rewrote outlines until they looked exactly right, and refused to leave until every source had been double-checked. Watching him work made me realize that his success came from discipline as much as talent. One rainy afternoon, the library closed early because of a scheduled maintenance inspection, leaving us without anywhere quiet to finish our presentation. Noah suggested the small community center a few blocks away, where volunteers often gathered after school. We found an empty meeting room overlooking the basketball court and spread our notebooks across a long table. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows while the building echoed with distant conversations and bouncing basketballs. It was surprisingly peaceful, somewhere between discussing historical events and organizing presentation slides. Our conversation drifted toward everything except school. Noah admitted that he had wanted to study architecture before everyone convinced him that athletic scholarships were the safer choice. I confessed that I secretly enjoyed drawing building designs, even though I had never shown anyone my sketchbook. His eyes lit up with genuine excitement instead of surprise. "You should show me someday," he said. "I would like to see what you create." Nobody had ever sounded so sincerely interested in something I considered ordinary. The afternoon disappeared faster than either of us expected. When we finally packed our bags, the rain had become heavier. I reached into my backpack for my umbrella only to realize I had left it in my locker. Before I could decide whether to make a run for it, Noah quietly opened the large navy umbrella he had been carrying. "Come on," he said with an easy smile. "It is only 3 blocks." We walked side by side beneath the same umbrella while cars splashed through shallow puddles along the street. The silence between us never felt uncomfortable. Somehow it felt familiar, as though we had been sharing quiet walks for years instead of days. Halfway home, my phone buzzed with another message from Lara. "I hope you are okay. I promise I will tell him everything soon." I slipped the phone back into my pocket without answering. For the first time, it was not fear that stopped me from pushing for the truth. It was uncertainty. Every conversation with Noah revealed another piece of the person hidden beneath his perfect reputation, and every shared afternoon made the original misunderstanding feel farther away than before. We had never agreed to pretend. We had never discussed what everyone believed. Yet somewhere along the way, we had started acting exactly the way everyone imagined we would, and neither of us seemed ready to be the first person to break the illusion. The morning our history presentation was due felt different from the moment I walked through the front doors of Westbrook High. The usual laughter in the hallways sounded quieter, almost as though everyone sensed something important was about to happen. Noah met me outside our classroom carrying the finished presentation folder with the same calm smile he always wore. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, although my thoughts were nowhere near the project. Lara had sent me 3 messages before school. "We need to talk today. I cannot keep hiding. I am telling him after class." Every word made my stomach feel heavier. Throughout the presentation, Noah and I worked together effortlessly. We finished each other's explanations, answered questions without hesitation, and earned an enthusiastic round of applause from our classmates when we finished. Our teacher even smiled and said we had set the standard for the entire class. As everyone packed their bags, Mason leaned toward me and whispered, "You two make a ridiculously good team." Normally, I would have rolled my eyes. Instead, I looked at Noah laughing with our teacher and wondered how everything had become so complicated. After lunch, Lara finally asked us to meet behind the Performing Arts building where the courtyard stayed quiet during free period. I arrived first. She stood beside the flower beds, twisting the strap of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "I cannot do this anymore," she said before I even spoke. "Every day I wait, it gets worse." I nodded slowly. "You are right." A few moments later, Noah walked into the courtyard with his usual relaxed expression. "You wanted to see me?" he asked. Lara took one deep breath, then another. "I need to tell you something about the letter." Noah looked at both of us without saying a word. Tears gathered in Lara's eyes as the guilt she had been carrying finally spilled out. "I wrote it," she admitted quietly. "Ethan was only helping me. He never confessed to you. None of this was supposed to happen. I was too scared to tell the truth. And then everything got completely out of control. The courtyard became perfectly still. Even the distant sounds of students crossing campus seemed to disappear. I stepped forward immediately. "She is telling the truth," I said. I should have explained everything that first day. Every time I tried, something happened, and after a while, I kept putting it off. "I am sorry." Noah lowered his eyes toward the ground. His expression did not show anger or disappointment. If anything, it became unreadable. That somehow felt even worse. Several long seconds passed before he finally spoke. "I see." His voice remained calm, but the warmth that had always been there was suddenly gone. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and looked at Lara first. "Thank you for telling me." Then he looked at me. There were countless things I wanted to say, but none of them seemed enough. "Noah," I began. He gave me a small, polite smile that felt painfully unfamiliar. "I think I need some time." Without another word, he turned and walked across the courtyard alone. I watched him disappear through the school gates, unable to move, while the silence he left behind felt far heavier than any argument ever could. For the first time since that blue envelope had changed everything, I truly believed I had lost him before I had ever been honest about what he had come to mean to me. The next 2 days felt longer than the entire semester that came before them. Noah did not avoid me, but he no longer waited outside my classes, saved me a seat in the library, or walked home beside me after school. He greeted me with the same quiet politeness he showed everyone else, and somehow that hurt more than if he had been angry. Mason watched me stare across the cafeteria one afternoon and sighed. "You know," he said, "I have never seen Noah this quiet before." I looked down at my untouched lunch. "I deserve it." "Maybe," Mason admitted. "But I still think there is something you are missing." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the final bell rang before the conversation could continue. That afternoon, I stopped by the library anyway, more out of habit than hope. I expected the familiar study table to be empty. Instead, I found a pale blue envelope resting neatly on the center of the table. My heart skipped the moment I recognized it. It was the same letter Lara had written all those days ago, carefully folded, perfectly preserved. Before I could pick it up, I heard footsteps behind me. Noah stood a few feet away with both hands in the pockets of his jacket. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I forced myself to break the silence. "I am sorry," I said. "Not just for the misunderstanding. I am sorry for waiting so long to tell you the truth." Noah looked at the envelope instead of me. Then, to my complete surprise, he smiled. It was small, but it was real. "Ethan," he said quietly, "I figured out the truth on the very first day." I stared at him, convinced I had heard him wrong. "What?" He picked up the envelope and turned it over, gently tracing the handwriting with one finger. The name on the inside was Lara's. She forgot to sign the outside, but she signed the letter itself. My mind went completely blank. "Then you knew?" He nodded. "Almost immediately. I could not understand any of it. If you knew, then why did you never say anything? Noah laughed softly, shaking his head at himself. Because for the first time in years, someone talked to me without expecting anything in return. He finally looked directly into my eyes. Everyone else approached the captain of the soccer team, the honor student, or the person they imagined I was. You treated me like an ordinary classmate. You apologized when you thought you had inconvenienced me. You argued with me about history sources. You laughed at terrible jokes without trying to impress me. He paused before continuing. I knew the letter was not yours. But every conversation after that was real. I felt every carefully built excuse fall apart at once. So, you let the misunderstanding continue. Noah nodded again, looking almost embarrassed. I told myself I would explain everything the next day. Then we had lunch together. Then we started our project. Then I realized those were the happiest afternoons I had experienced in a long time. I kept waiting for the right moment, and eventually I was just as trapped inside the misunderstanding as you were. I looked at the blue envelope resting between us and finally understood that the letter had never been the reason our story had continued. It had only been the door that allowed two ordinary conversations to become something neither of us had expected. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence no longer felt awkward. It felt honest. Noah carefully placed Lara's letter back on the table before reaching into his backpack and pulling out another envelope. It was plain white with my name written neatly across the front. He smiled in that quiet way I had come to recognize, the smile that belonged to Noah instead of the golden boy everyone else admired. He slid the envelope toward me. The blue letter was never yours, he said. This one is. I looked at him in complete surprise. You wrote me a letter? He nodded. I realized there were some things I wanted to say without anyone interrupting us this time. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting. The first sentence immediately made me laugh through the emotions building inside me. It read, if someone had told me that the best thing to happen to me would begin with the wrong letter in the wrong locker, I never would have believed them. I kept reading. Noah wrote about how exhausting it had been trying to live up to everyone's expectations, how every compliment seemed tied to grades, trophies, or achievements instead of who he really was. Then he wrote about our afternoons in the library, our conversations during walks home, the way I challenged his opinions without caring about his reputation, and how peaceful everything felt whenever he could simply be himself. Near the bottom of the page, one sentence made my eyes stop moving. I did not fall for the misunderstanding. I fell for the person who stayed beside me after it. I lowered the letter slowly and looked back at Noah. I do not know what to say. He laughed softly. You do not have to give a perfect speech. I think we have both learned where overthinking gets us. I smiled for what felt like the first genuine time in days. Then I will just tell the truth. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest. I kept trying to fix the mistake because I thought that was the right thing to do. Somewhere along the way, I stopped worrying about the misunderstanding and started worrying about losing you instead. That scared me because I had never expected any of this to happen. Noah's expression brightened with unmistakable relief. So, he asked gently, if we take the misunderstanding out of the story, would you still like to spend time with me? This time there was nothing to interrupt us. No ringing bell. No crowd filling the hallway. No rumor racing through school before either of us could speak. I smiled and answered exactly what I felt. Yes, I would. Noah let out a quiet breath that sounded as though he had been holding it for weeks. We left the library together that afternoon, carrying 2 letters instead of 1. Lara's blue envelope had started everything by accident, but Noah's white envelope marked the beginning of something completely real. The rumors around school eventually faded into ordinary conversations, and people found new stories to talk about. What remained was far simpler and far more meaningful. We continued studying together, walking home together, encouraging each other through difficult days, and discovering that the happiest relationships often begin in the most unexpected ways. Looking back now, I still smile whenever I think about one misplaced letter because it taught me something I will never forget. Sometimes life opens the right door with the wrong key, and sometimes the greatest surprises begin with the courage to finally tell the truth.